scientific discovery, artificial intelligence, digital technologies, financial innovation, and unprecedented access to information are changing how economic produce, finance, govern, and distribute prosperity. Yet, history also reminds us that knowledge and technology alone do not guarantee economic transformation. Countries must develop the institutions that allow ideas to flourish, the financial system that mobilizes resources towards productive uses, and the human capabilities that turn knowledge into innovation, productivity, jobs, and improvement of people's life. So with that, this actually raises a fundamental question on what transforms scientific knowledge and innovation into a sustained economic prosperity, and why are some societies much more successful at doing this than the others? So with that, we are exceptionally fortunate to have our two distinguished panels, top global economists and Nobel laureates. If I can use the analogy of football, so we are actually having Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo in this panel. So I hope everybody will enjoy the session, because we have the top economists in the world that will share their view to us. So with that, let me now introduce our panelists. I will start with Professor Robert C. Merton. So he is one of the founding figures in modern financial economics. Professor Merton received the 1997 Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Science in memory of Alfred Nobel, jointly with Myron, for developing a new method for determining the value of derivatives. He has a distinguished academic career at MIT and Harvard University. His contribution extends far beyond option pricing. His research has shaped modern thinking on financial innovation, portfolio theory, risk management, financial intermediation, retirement finance, institutional challenge, and macro financial systemic risk. So please join me. Welcome Professor Merton at this panel. It is equally a great privilege for me to also introduce Professor James Robinson. He is a professor at the University of Chicago and one of the world's leading scholars of political economy and economic development. Professor Robinson received the 2024 Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Science in memory of Alfred Nobel, together with Daron and Simon Johnson, for their studies on how institutions are formed and how they affect prosperity. He is widely known for his work on political institutions, economic development, state capacity, political power, and institutional change. And for his influential book, including Why Nations Fail. I don't know who has the book, but actually this book is very, very famous. Who has the book? Can you raise your hand? Why Nation Fails. Okay, I think we have few people in the room that have your book. And also another book is Economic Origin of Dictatorship and Democracy and the Narrow Corridor. So please join me. Welcome Professor Robinson. So with that, let me now give 5 to 7 minutes, if you don't mind, to our two panelists to share their reflections on their expertise area, and then after that we'll have a question and answer to dig deep on their expertise, and hopefully we'll get more knowledge from these two distinguished panelists. So, Professor Meton, can I start with you?
Well, thank you. I'd love to have these kinds around your neck and to walk around, but I'll hold it. I think most people have dealt with money from the time they were very young, and coins and things. So there's a tendency to think we all understand finance. So I thought I would give my 5 minutes to give you a sort of framing of the subject so that when we have the continuing discussion, and I hope it would end. So let me first begin by saying that a well-functioning financial system is essential for sustainable growth and development. It's important. All right? My collaborator and wife likes to sing, it's like the circulatory system in us. It takes capital from part of the system and flows it through to where it's needed, and it finds where it is and gets it to where it's needed, and if it's doing a good job, it does it well and efficiently. Okay? So there are really in my view, six core functions of the financial system. Number one is currencies, being able to do transactions, buy and sell from one another, goods, services, etc., asset buying. Number two is pooling of savings to get them so we can finance large individual projects. It sounds simple, but just think, millions of people in a country might be saving small amounts. How do you collect all of that up and aggregate it in such a fashion that it can finance a very big project? So that's a second function. A third one is economic transportation of resources. You mentioned the circulatory system, but it's more than that. And basically, it's a way of moving economic resources from one place to another to get it where they need it. It says that we want to have, it has to go through time. And I would point out very quickly on that, if you think about it, if you want to move something you have today to the future, that's your own saving, you can do that by storage. It may not be efficient, but it's physically possible. Tell me, however, how you would, by yourself, physically, bring something that you're going to get in the future back to today so that you can get that's what's in the future. You think of that as borrowing. There's no physical way to borrow, okay? So I'm just trying to give you common sense reasons why these are really important. And that's a fundamental characteristic. So that's the third one. The fourth one has to do with information. Now, the manifest function of markets, financial markets, is transactions, buying and selling. But there's an incredibly important latent function, which is the markets themselves, the prices in those markets contain enormous amounts of very high-quality information. And I say high quality because the market, like in some people's eyes, AI, doesn't know what it's doing. It just does it. It's a machine that finds willing buyers and willing sellers so the transaction happens. But in that process, it's behaving as a machine, not with any knowledge, really, other than doing it. It accumulates extraordinary amounts of information. Information that no one has. With all respect, no central bank has it all. No George Soros. No sovereign wealth fund. Each of those may have pieces of the information, but you've all played the game of trying to guess what the whole looks like from knowing about only one part. And just think of an elephant. If you had the ear versus the tail, how you would forecast what an elephant looks like, what its size is, and you get the sense. It's an amazing system when the markets work. And the markets do work pretty well financially globally. So that latent function, even if you were never going to trade, you watch those markets and you extract information. And if someone says, well, we won't need that because AI will do it, think about this. Everybody's going to have AI, and certainly central banks, sovereign wealth funds are going to have the best AI for finance, and they're going to have the best people because they're going to hire the experts to be for them. They're the ones doing the transactions. It's not the average person who sets the price. So think of it as high quality of that sort. No one has that information, and I'm not sure. I don't think AI is going to beat markets. Maybe at the beginning, but it won't do it because the markets themselves are bringing all the information that AI brings in, and then there always are differences of opinion, different models, and it aggregates those in a very efficient way. I bring that out because most people don't really think about that. Then the fifth one that I wanted to mention was see, I got my little note here. Oh, yeah. Asymmetric information. How do you deal with a situation where you are transacting with someone, you're buying a house or selling a house or whatever, and the other party may have information that's important and that you don't have, and therefore it's the old soul. If they're willing to buy, you don't want to sell, and vice versa, because you think of the information if they're selling. And markets, we found ways in finance to deal with that problem. Okay, so those are the six. Now, in my last 2 minutes, if I can, I'd like to give you one example. And the example I like is the one that didn't bring up as a specific, but it's probably the most important, or certainly among the most important activities in the finance and in financial markets, which is dealing with uncertainty, managing risk. Okay? Now, that's a good subject here because we're talking about development. And I think it's fair to say there's a lot of uncertainty about the future when you're making decisions for planning and development. It's not a second order effect, it's first order. And so I wanted to point out to you just how finance could help improve that. And maybe you can think of it when you're thinking about discussions, whether here or in other sessions, about development, which is when you have uncertainty, well, first I should say, often what's done is people pick the expected outcome or the most likely outcome and act like it's certain. In other words, they never put any formal uncertainty analysis. That's a big mistake, especially in an environment which is uncertain. What are the two things that I will tell you are critically important in any kind of uncertainty that's of any metric? One is the magic of diversification. If you put all your eggs in one basket, there's a certain amount of risk. If you put 1/10 of different eggs in the basket or different items in the basket, you will have lower risk even if they have the same expected payoff. That's diversification. Life insurance companies that you may be familiar with, okay? That's a magic. It really happens. You actually get lower risk. What else does the risk management do? It directs through the financial system the risk. It doesn't just do capital, but it does risks. It points the risk to the best user of that risk. And that turns out to be important. Now, to the example. I assume at least some people in the room here know how drug discovery is done. Okay? Now, if you have a single molecule that you're trying to see if it will solve a problem, the record is roughly about 5% succeed. So you have 95% failures and 5% success. And it might take 10 years and $250 million. If you use the standard analysis and say, I'm going to evaluate the expectations. If I do it, what are you telling that model? You're saying, if you decide to do it, you're going all the way to the end no matter what. Even if it turns out it's going to be a failure, and you know it. That's the wrong model. The way it's done in drug discovery is you do something in a small amount, the first phase, to see at least whether it is toxic. If it's toxic, you quit. You don't go on and spend another 9 years and $200 million on that project. Okay? So that's the first one. Then you have a success. Then you get rid of the ones that don't work with a small bet, a small amount of risk, a relatively short time. And then what do? You take the ones that you think look good enough and you move them up. You keep that up through the phases till you get to phase 3, which is usually very expensive. Phase 4, I won't get into. Phase 3 is really an expensive one where you spend a lot of money. The ones that get there are the ex post successes. The uncertainty is no longer 5%, 95% failure. It's much more credible. So you've brought yourself through the dynamic of that to lower risk. Flexibility in general, in uncertainty, is incredibly valuable. It has no value in a world of certainty. So if your models pretend it's certain, you act like, I know what's going to happen. I'm acting like that. So if you know what's going to happen, you don't need any flexibility. So that's why I wanted to underscore this to you. And that's what finance does very well. So I hope this gives you a little sense of what it's about and where it's important. And by the way, on the biotech examples, if you do it the standard way, you would not do a lot of drugs. If you look at you have the wrong model. It's not obvious. So that optionality, flexibility, turns out to be incredibly important in that domain. And I would suspect it will be very important in most of the many big projects you do in development, because they're a long time, lots of uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Milton. I think, you started with a very important line. You say that a well-functioning financial system is essential for sustainable development, and it will come with the functions of saving, currency, economic, transportation, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think in the beginning I used the analogy of football. So Professor Merton just shared with us on, if you were a football team, how could you qualify to play in the World Cup? But Professor Robinson will share with us on how could you play in a World Cup. So Professor Merton is actually specialized in finance, and now we have Professor Robinson to share with us on institutional development for economic transformation. So with that, Professor Robinson, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much for inviting me. Very happy to be here. So let me just say a few things about the relationship between science and economic development and economic progress. And the way I think about this is through the lens of the work by the great MIT economist Robert Solow in the 1950s, when Robert was trying to understand what created economic development, economic growth over time. He did this sort of decomposition, and he said, well, actually, the really big story is not the accumulation of factors of production, not demography, not even capital accumulation. It's about the efficiency with which factors of production are used. He called that total factor productivity in a very sort of nerdy language. And there's many things that go into total factor productivity, but the really big story is about technology. It's about innovation. I think if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, since I'm British, I like talking about the Industrial Revolution, since that's when we were glorious in Britain and we were spearheading the world. What was the Industrial Revolution? The Industrial Revolution was a series of innovations that massively increased the productivity of factors of production. Think about James Watt with his steam engine. Now, did that involve science? It certainly involved innovation. It involved scientific methodology. It involved empiricism, observation. James Watt knew about, he wasn't a scientist, but he knew about vacuums and he knew about gas laws, and he was a tinkerer more than a scientist. But of course, as the world economy evolved, as technology became more and more sophisticated, it became more and more reliant on real science, real scientists, and scientific knowledge to advance technology, to improve productivity, to improve the efficiency of the factors of production. But I think, for a country like Timor-Leste, for developing nations of a sort where I worked in my entire career, I think it's very important to make a distinction in some sense between what you could call the world technology frontier, like the real cutting-edge ways of doing things, of organizing production, real cutting-edge technologies, and you could be at the world technology frontier. We'd like to think of the United States as being at the world technology frontier, as using all of the kind of most effective, most productive technologies. But most countries in the world are not at the world technology frontier. They're inside the world technology frontier. And their development objective, in some sense, is to move to the world technology frontier. That involves science and scientists as well, but it might be, and I'm kind of going to throw this out as an observation, it might be different sorts of science or different sorts of scientists. Let me give you a very concrete example. In 1976, in South Korea, they didn't produce any microwave ovens. Samsung bought something called a Jet 230 made by General Electric, and they got some engineers and they put them in a factory and said, tell us how that thing works. Like, just pull it apart and figure out how this microwave oven works. So they pulled it apart, they made a microwave oven, it blew up. They made another one, it melted. They made another one, they kept going, they kept going, they kept going. After 2 years, they'd managed to produce a microwave oven. But here was the problem. Samsung could start making these things in 1980, 4 years after they started. They exported one to the United States. But it was still sort of expensive because they had to buy all these parts from Japan. So what did they do? There was one company in the United States that made a particular part they needed. It went bankrupt. Samsung went, they bought up everything, they shipped it to Korea. They did the same thing over again until they could make this part. 1987, they were the world, 11 years after they started doing this, they became the world's largest manufacturer of microwave ovens. Okay? So there's science, reverse engineering, technology adoption, technology diffusion. That's actually the really big story about all economic growth in the past 50, 60 years. You don't have to be like the United States. You don't have to have a world-leading AI industry or whatever. There's enormous benefits for the society from adopting, innovating, but that takes science too. It takes knowledge. You have to understand how these things work. You have to understand the principles. You have to be able to reverse engineer them. You have to be able to use them, and you have to know what sort of science you need for that. And I think that depends a lot on where you are in the world economy and what your potential is and what your constraints are. You know, I'm not advocating, just in case you were thinking, that Timor-Leste should develop a microwave industry. Agriculture might be much more relevant. The president was mentioning agriculture today. So that's a scientific thing too. That's about agronomy. It's about raising agricultural productivity. How do you do that? What inputs are necessary? What crop varieties are useful for that? What are adapted to the ecology or the climatic conditions of Timor-Leste. So that also involves science, and it involves decisions about what kind of science to prioritize, which depends on your development model, where you're going to go. But let me end by saying one more thing, which is I'm all in favor of natural science, but social science is really important too. You know, if I think about a country, I mentioned South Korea. South Korea is extraordinary because it went from an extremely poor country to one of the world's most sophisticated economies basically in a generation. Okay. But North Korea is a very poor country. But that's not a problem of science or natural science. It's a problem of social science, of power relations and politics and ideology. So we need natural science and we need social science too.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, Professor Robinson, for the fascinating insights that you just shared with us. And I think it's very important. You say the efficiency of allocation of factor of productivity is important. And science, innovation, and technologies are very, very important for economic transformations. So with that, as I said, I will give the floor to the audience to ask questions. I believe many of you probably already took note and come with the questions. But let me use my privilege as the moderator by asking first and probably the second questions, and then I will give the floor to the audience. I guess my first question is associated to my current role as the governor of the central banks. So according to the IMF, there are about 25 countries around the globe that actually giving away their monetary sovereignty because of fully dollarization and currency board regime. There are many reasons why they're giving away their monetary sovereignty. But the main reason is actually for the stability. But actually the stability comes with the cost of no flexibility. I guess the question that I would like to ask is, do you think this country should maintain their status quo of the existing regime, or do they need to think about changing the regime? If they come with the latter idea of changing the regime, what do you think factors or conditions that they should consider, put in place, for the smooth transition and to balance stability and credibility in the future?
Who do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe Professor Robinson first and then Professor Metal.
Can I just say, make a parenthetical remark about investment in education and the International Monetary Fund? Like, one thing I've noticed in working in developing countries is that successful developing countries are always capable of challenging the conventional wisdom from the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or foreign academics or whoever it is. You have to be able to evaluate what's being told to you and what's being suggested to you and be skeptical about it and understand what applies to you and what doesn't apply. And that takes kind of intellectual self-confidence, that takes investment in education, but I do think that's incredibly important. I think if you look at any country, that's been very successful in the past 60 or 70 years, whether it be, China or South Korea or Mauritius or Rwanda today, whatever it is, they have that courage to sort of say, we're going to do our own thing, we're going to define our own model, and we're going to learn, and we're interested in what you know, but we're going to do with it what we want to do with it. So that's a kind of parenthetical remark. I think this question, the more specific question you're asking me or asking the professor and I about what kind of monetary regime to have, like the way I would think about that is that's really about the strength of your institutions and whether your institutions can kind of manage that. I think what you see in many developing countries, like in Zimbabwe, for example, Zimbabwe has shown that it's unable to manage its own currency. And in the past 50 years, almost 46 years since independence, there have been 4 hyperinflations. So I don't really have a deep understanding about why it's so difficult to manage a currency in Zimbabwe. But what I can see is that it creates enormous instability and it holds back investment, it holds back entrepreneurship, it holds back the economy. That kind of instability is a sort of disaster. So at the same time, you can imagine that there are advantages from having your own currency. So, for example, somebody was telling me yesterday at lunch how, because you have a dollarized economy, it's very attractive to go to the border with Indonesia in the rest of Timor and buy consumption goods on the other side of the border. So you have a sort of overvalued exchange rate in some sense as a consequence of this dollarization. So that's not good for the economy either. And some academics, some economists would say actually having an undervalued currency is an enormously powerful way of fomenting kind of transformation. I haven't done research on that. I'm not sure I have a view on it. But that would sort of suggest there's trade-offs here. There's advantages and disadvantages. And I think that is really a question of, do you have the institutional capacity to manage your own currency? I don't have enough depth of knowledge of Timor to know the answer to that, but that's how I would think about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Meton, please.
Well, first of all, I agree with what you had to say. I would look at it somewhat differently in that, ask the question, what are you trying to do? The whole convention here is about the development here in Timor-Leste. That's what we're about here. So I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm going to talk about a hypothetical country, but it might have some characteristics that are similar, and it's relative to development. I see a lot of exciting things here, and you have some wonderful comparative advantages, not the least of which is your remarkable size sovereign wealth fund, which very few developing countries have. So you have a lot that you need to do. You've heard about it, I've thought about it, I've looked at it. You have a lot to do. And the question is, do you want to roll the dice by at this time, creating your own currency with all the potential problems that can occur? One, you have to do it. Two, you're taking a risk that it's not going to work. It's the wrong time. Not the wrong idea, wrong time. And that's correlate to your institutions are right. And that's a lot on your plate when you look at the size here and what you want to achieve. So hear me clearly. There will be a time when I think you'll want to have your own currency. You do, in a sense, for transactions here with the centavos. Right? Yeah. I mean, and I even looked to make sure that there wasn't a gazillion of them issued. So you've solved the sort of basic transaction problem here pretty well, even though you're dollarized. I agree, running across borders is a problem, but it's magnitude. Everything in economics is a trade-off. If it weren't a trade-off, we'd already have done it. If there's one best way, everybody does it. So in the end, no matter what you do to optimize, what suggestions you make, you're going to have to make choices. You're going to have to make trade-offs. If you choose, for example, with your sovereign wealth fund, to spend those resources on current expenses, there's a cost to that. You all know that here. And I'm not going to tell you whether you should or shouldn't, but recognize that that's a real cost. That if you took that money and invested in development of local industry, that would that would be something that has a return, instead of, as it is now, you invest all overseas, which is actually a good idea if you're not going to do the development. So it's always going to be a cost. It's going to take you more time to get there if you keep that. There are only three ways to do it. You invest more, which means you consume less. Nobody likes that. Or you want it in a shorter time, you're going to have to do more. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait not 10 years, but maybe 15. The third way, which is always the one that gets given, is take more risk. Because if you take more risk, the theory is, and the trick in finance is, you have to take the right kind of risks. I don't mean that but that's another story. But leave aside that point. The idea is if you take more risk, you have more expected return. And then you get told stories like, well, over the long run, it won't matter. That's false mathematically, it's false empirically, and it's false theoretically. I wish it worked otherwise. We all could figure out great ways to run things. It's like being able to violate the second law of thermodynamics. I wish I could do that too, but I wouldn't count on it. So the monetary, the point is these are going to be trade-offs. I would, if you want a thought, and I don't pretend that I know enough about here to give you actual recommendation, my sense would be I'd put that on the back burner. Things seem to be very well, understanding the disadvantage. But other things are very well. I mean, just think, you're now in part of the ASEAN. That's fantastic. You're in WTO. You're going to be dealing with lots of other countries. There's only 1.5 million here, right? Well, believe it or not, it's really very convenient if you're the dollar. Everybody understands the dollar. When you write contracts, you write them in dollars. That has a huge value, okay? Trust your own people. If they save in dollars, okay, they have confidence, not because they think you're going to do something bad, but because things happen to developing countries. That if you have the dollar, they're going to be pretty secure that that's going to be worth, that's going to be worth something later when they want to spend their savings. Okay? I won't go through the whole list, but you get the sense of the flow. And so I would just say, do it, but don't do it now.
Okay, thank you. I got your last point of do it, but don't do it now. And if I connect to the point that made by Professor Robinson, it's a policy trade-off, preparation is important, and institutional capacity is extremely important. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I guess my follow-up question, in which I believe will be my last question because a lot of the Prime Minister already raised the hand. Let me ask the next question, and I will give the floor to the Prime Minister and to the rest. The next question is on why many countries successfully delivering services to transform the economy, and why many of the countries do not. Why some countries are successfully delivering or successfully transforming the economy, but many people or many countries are also do not successfully transforming the economy. Is it because of finance, institution, innovation, technology, I don't know, you probably have the experience. Can you share with us? Is it because of the level of playing field of these factors are different? So what actually differentiate these two different groups of countries? Maybe Professor Merton first, and then
okay.
Professor Robinson.
They picked the zone of, he's the guy that talks about institutions. But what I would say there is the reality is there isn't one answer. Okay, failure occur or successes occur for different reasons, and so you actually have to do more analysis than success or not success. That it's multidimensional. It's like people when there's a crisis, big financial crisis that we have in the world. People always say to me, "What caused it?" They want one answer. Now think about that in common sense. Something as complex as failure or crisis, it's very unlikely to have one cause. So the answer is, and I'm not an octopus, but they always say economists on the one hand, on the other, they like one-armed economists, so they get decisions. Well, you actually need many arms to answer that question seriously. And so you need to do the analysis. You need to understand where it is. Sometimes it's because, you have the so-called the elites, that don't share or whatever. Because if you don't have access, you can have wonderful technology, wonderful science, and a great idea, but if you can't bring it to market, if you don't have access, it's not going to happen. So that could be one reason. But there are many, many others, and I won't run through them all, but I think the message that you want to hear is some questions are more complex than a single answer if you want a serious answer.
Thank you, Professor. Now, Professor Robinson, please.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think that there's many different ways of solving problems. Back in the 1960s, there was Alexander Gerschenkron, who was a very distinguished economic historian, wrote a paper about how different countries industrialize in different ways, and they mobilize finance in different ways because they have different initial conditions and different advantages and different historical conditions. And there's substitutes. There's no one way of doing things. You can substitute. So I think that he actually particularly focused on finance and the role of stock markets or the role of banks, and I think there's many institutions are important for economic development, but in developing countries, often you have a lot of institutional problems. You have institutional problems with property rights or with the legal system or with the financial system, and you can't solve all those problems at the same time. And I think finance and institutions in general sort of co-evolve, and which one do you want to emphasize depends very much on your kind of strategy and your developmental model and what the opportunities are, and so I don't think I completely agree with Professor Merton that you can't make a blanket statement about which one is the most important.
Yeah, I just want you mentioned. Anyway, if I had two recommendations, all right, one of them is to deal with the mismatch in your expenditures from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I don't think you need me to tell you that, but I think that's really important for everything that you want to do. The second one, and you pushed the magic button that I wanted to mention, is some would just say the rule of law, but that's too generalized. In order for people to be willing to invest, in order for people to get resources to invest, they have to have ownership. If you have land or you have a house, but you don't know whether you have proof that you actually own it, no one's going to lend you money on it. All right? So this is technologically doable. I mean, blockchain, I'm not giving you technical advice. I'm just saying, we have mechanisms that are very efficient for recording things like ownership. And if you give people the land, give them a chance, they own that asset. If they do, and they have the ownership, they can either use it as collateral to get the money they need to do what their business is, or they can do it the other way around, which is, that they, are willing to invest in their own house or land because they know they own it. I'm not going to improve a house that I don't own. Then so that's really, really important. Ownership, and it fits in with incentives. because you have no incentive to improve things, to build. You know, I come in and I build as an entrepreneur a wonderful company, and then you say, oh, but you don't own it.
Yes.
So you get the point. I just wanted to underscore what Professor
Thank you.
Roberts
Thank you
said.
for the recommendations, customized to our context. So now I give the floor to the audience. I see the Prime Minister would like to ask question, but I would like to give chance to 3 people first, and then if we still have time, then we can extend the opportunity for asking questions. So, Prime Minister, please.
I have no questions. I only have comments. Thank you, professors. When I arrived, because you started, I was outside there taking photos. Professor Robinson talking about agriculture. It is something that I have to say, science and economic transformation. Before, in my childhood, until a few years ago, we tried to, our people, our farmers, use the buffaloes to produce. The science gave us the opportunity for tractors, but it is not giving too much income. Recently, because of the team science and economic transformation, now our farmers are more able to produce in small tractors, and they have a machine for harvesting, another one for producing rice already, and the science allows in some places of the country to produce 2 times. Before it was only once. Now, it means, yes, it is what we are trying to learn from developed countries. About the problem when I came in, the first question was about currency. You are right, Professor Robinson, no.
Professor Merton.
Merton,
I'm him.
about the confidence, stability, trust. That is why right now we are still using US dollars. We cannot be so ambitious to have our own currency. It is a stupidity. Because you know, we go around, in 1 month we go to Bali, $1 is 19,000 rupees. Another month you go there, it is 17,000. Another month you go there, suddenly it is 9,000. We don't have, I believe, we don't have the basis to have our own currency. And the dollar is helping us for the stability, for the confidence, trust. Now, I don't understand all of these issues, but now we are trying to study to see if we have gold. If we have gold, I believe that in the good good one, I believe that it will be a basis for our own currency. But right now we have nothing. That is why for us it is more for stability, trust, confidence, we still use US dollars. The other question was about some countries use this, some countries, why? I believe in the previous session, it was there as moderator, the Secretary General of G7 Plus. G7 Plus is an intergovernmental organization. The G is small, very small. G7, not G7, the big ones. We deal with fragile, in conflict or post-conflict countries. We see that the problem of why some countries do this and other countries don't do. The fragile countries defines the countries that don't have a good system, no democracy. It is ambition, political ambition, and coup d'etat, and military junta, etc., etc. I went once, a few years ago, to Milan to talk about food security. We talked about food security. I reminded, it was an international conference, I reminded the international community that in Africa, because we went to visit many countries in Africa, big countries, rich countries, with big rivers, very good, with a big potential to produce, but because of the conflict, they don't produce. Very, very recently, it was viral in the news, the hundreds of people in Ceuta going to be trying to be immigrant in the European Union. Why? I asked in the conference in Milan. Why? Why they are coming to Europe if they have so many land, good lands, rich land, and they don't produce there? It is because of the conflict. That is why not only science and economic transformation, but the problem is how the international community can help. We help it not teaching. We exchange only our experience of solving conflicts. And some countries from the G7 Plus, they already corrected the system. They are in a good position to do something for the country, but no financing. I have to tell you a story. In the Central African Republic, it was the peacekeeping force are there for more than 25 years already. No peace, no keeping. And the country is very rich in oil, in diamond, in gold, but because developed countries pay a tribe, pay another tribe, they fight, nothing happens. That is why I believe that beyond the scientific perspective, we have to talk about the problem of helping them to solve their conflicts, and the international community can give some money to them to start, because in our theme is no peace, no development, but if no development, no peace. That is why your question to the panelists, the problem is this. I said already, science helped us to start developing our agriculture, the small machines. Before it was big tractors and so difficult. Now, small. And after that, they can harvest with also small machines. And the science allowed us to see the situation and to teach the people to produce twice a year, at least. In some places with more water, they can produce 3 times a year. That is why I'm very sorry, it is only a comment on the currency. We cannot avoid, because now is more stable for us, give more confidence to our people using the US dollar. Although there is a very problematic time now, but and for the countries that do something and countries that cannot do something, it is the problem also of the international community changing their policy and try to help. To help, because if they change already the regime, if they got already peace, now without money they will not. And because if there is no change there, the population will be, same. And before it was the same, now also democratic, very democratic, but we are not going anywhere. It is only a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the comments. I don't know, Professor, do you have any reaction towards the comment of the Prime Minister? Or otherwise, because we are probably about 5 minutes more left, so I want to use this time efficiently, but otherwise you can make a short comment to the Prime Minister.
Can I just make one comment on the currency, because that's what's been the discussion. Many of you know about all the technology, cryptocurrencies and everything. I'm not going to go into that, but that's very modern. Ask yourself, they usually say all the currencies, dollars, RMB, sterling, Bitcoin, whatever, they're all what we call currencies with no real backing. That's a mistake. That's a mistake in thinking. And let me just give you an example. If the dollar, if tomorrow, this afternoon, every country in the world said we won't take dollars, of course the US would, okay? Let's say the dollars crash. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sweep those dollars up. Why? Because they have intrinsic value. I'm going to start in the United States, and I'm going to go to everybody in the United States who has a dollar mortgage. I would say, I'll pay it. How about your taxes? They're in the United States dollars. I'll pay your taxes, for a small fee, okay? And when I finish with $112 trillion of real estate, I'm then going to go to the rest of the world where a huge number of contracts, long-term contracts, not overnight, are in dollars. They don't have a choice. Your bank in the United States, if it's in dollars, they have to accept dollars. So if I could say anything else, since we're on the topic of currency, keep in mind, Bitcoin is missing the thing that structures it, which every central bank does, to take that currency and relate it to things you want to buy. It's missing a mechanism. Now, I'm not trying to put Bitcoin down, but I can't resist, with all the tops of technology and those things, there's a lot of stuff that you better investigate pretty carefully to see if it's sustainable in any fashion.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Robinson, you have any reaction or no? Okay. So now I'd like to take someone from this side. If you have any question for students, if you are struggling with the language, you can ask in Tetun and we try to translate with my poor English. And also from this side, because we want to take more questions from the students if possible. Okay, the lady. Yeah, please. And from this side, do we have anybody that would like to ask questions? Tapos sila beluso Tetun e depois kami tenta traduzir em inglês. Please ask the question and to whom you address the question.
So, good afternoon to everyone here. My name is Leah, and I'm currently taking my internship in National Petroleum Authority. And my question is related to both Mr. Robert and Mr. James. So, in a country that is trying to improve its economy, how can we push productivity and efficiency in the financial institution to then diversify and optimize them in the long run? And how can Timor-Leste do that sustainably without the usage of AI? Thank you.
Well, I got every part except...
You got the question, right? Because Professor Robinson doesn't get the question. Hold on. So I think the question is about how can we boost productivity without using AI? Am I correct?
I mean, I'm sure you can boost productivity with AI and through many other ways as well. I think, income per capita in Timor-Leste is... income per capita in Timor-Leste is like $3,000 PPP adjusted or something, $3,500. So this is enormous difference between productivity levels in Timor, whether it be in agriculture, in services, or anywhere else, and richer countries. So I'm sure there's all sorts of technologies, all sorts of changes in practices which would improve productivity with AI or without AI, So I'm not an expert to know what those are, but I think just the sheer level of productivity differences between Timor and rich countries, OECD countries, suggests that there must be many ways of raising productivity, and maybe some of them are just much easier. Using AI, you need power, maybe you need to be able to use it in a sophisticated way. Perhaps there's much simpler ways of raising productivity, but I'm no expert.
Okay, Professor Merton, please.
Well, what I first say is that AI is going to do a lot of things. We don't know what all it is, but my opinion, I can't prove it, but my opinion is it's going to be like lots of other innovations that I went through. I know this time it's different. There'll be important things that AI can do that let it do it, but it's not going to be the answer to everything. Because it's not the only, there's a mechanism there, just like I mentioned with markets. The markets don't know what they're doing, but by doing what they do, they create a lot of information, so they're very valuable. And so the first point is, it depends what you want to do, which is what you were saying, James. The second thing on innovation I feel I want to just say is, looking at it, is I believe in, I won't say here because I don't know, in most countries and most large companies, if they want to do something big, innovative, like a retirement system, some big project like that, what's the typical process? They say, go out and find best practice. Go to every country, and take the best practices and throw all of that on a table in a room, figuratively, and then put together all the pieces to get your best thing. I think that's a good thing to do, but that's not the solution. That's not the best way to do it. Why? Well, you heard it all day, and you see it. You heard that the universe is accelerating. Well, so is innovation. If I have a chart, I don't show it now, but 800 years of financial innovation, and the difference between how long it took between each innovation in 1200 versus now, if you put it on a chart, you have to look at it with a magnifying glass. So it's not only continuing the innovation, but it's accelerating. Now, why is that important? Best practice, if it's best practice, is a legacy. It's being done. So it's like driving, look in the rearview mirror. You see what I'm saying? So don't ask, has it been done? Ask, can it be done? And that means a whole much more in terms of how you think about how you manage the innovation. You don't do innovation looking at the past. It will work if you're driving, if the road in front of you is the same as the road behind you. That is for sure not the world we're living in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me take more questions. I was told that our session could be extended up to 1 hour, up to 1 o'clock. So we still have about 10 minutes. I don't know who wants to ask. No, I see two gentlemen here raise hands. The gentleman over there with the black shirt. Manu itabot. Yeah. Thank you. So can you make it concise because of the time concern?
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Manuel Pereira. I'm working for the Office of Vice Minister of Parliamentary Affairs. I think we all agree that in large extent that development can only move forward when we open the economic opportunities that allow people to improve their livelihoods and well-being. As someone without a background, economic background, that's at least what the essence of development of economic that I understand. Earlier, His Excellency Kailash Satyarthi also shared in his keynote address his experience of visiting Côte d'Ivoire and meeting with child laborers who were harvesting cocoa beans, the main raw materials used to...
Manuel, sorry, because of the time, can you go directly to the question?
Yeah, he shared similar experience regarding the child laborers in Congo as well. So the story, my question is, as we know that economics is a field study that places a great emphasis and uncertainty, numbers, graphics, statistics, etc. So, but the live realities of these child laborers actually fall within the scope of economic studies. My question, and perhaps most importantly, how should we account for these human realities in these calculations and measurement of modern economic today?
Can you repeat again the question? Just the question, and put the microphone close to your mouth so that we can hear.
How should we account for these human realities in the calculations and measurement of modern economics today?
Okay.
About the child laborers.
The
reality of child laborers.
How could we take into account the human reality, especially the child labor, into our economic modeling? Or economic transformation, if I guess. Maybe, I don't know, Professor, anybody could start first? Okay.
Well, we had discussion earlier this morning, a different sort, about happiness measures versus financial measures. I think that's one aspect of it. And, I think everybody here is a people of goodwill and wanting good things. But having said that, you get the analysis. In the end, as I said in my early remarks, no matter what you do, how much optimization you do, you're going to have to make trade-offs. And I try to give you that sense. That's why economists are still in business. Because if you knew the answer and it's always, you have an unambiguous answer for everyone, it has no value. So the answer is that you then take from the economic analysis and so forth and so on, you take that, and then you make decisions. Do I want to go let me just give you an example. Do I want to go to the population, let's say here, which is a relatively small one, and the government seems to communicate well there. You can go to them and say, look, here are the choices. I don't mean they vote on it, but you understand. If we are willing to invest more, which means save more, there's no magic, that means people are not going to have as much consumption as they did. But if they do that, then if you make that investment, you can get to a better place sooner. Or you can get better education sooner. Now, that's a trade-off. If you want to live here, you don't save as much, it's going to take you longer. And that's a trade-off. There's no way around it. There's no magic. Okay? And so that is a possible way. I have a thing that if you have the luxury, as it appears to me as my first term in this country, you have very good communication with the people. They may not always agree with you, but you have good communication, and it's a small population. And it seems that might be feasible here, where you couldn't do it in a large country like the United States. That may be hopeless, okay? And so that's the way you do it. You make decisions. There's no magic formula that's going to tell you this is how people ought to live. They make choices. We all make choices. And they should make the choice, not me sitting here coming from the United States.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Robinson, please.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, which I wrestle with a lot working in Africa, where the cultural context is extremely different from the cultural context where I grew up in England or in Western society, and where people attach value to different things, than appear in Western economics textbooks, And I think the way I think about it is you have to find your own way and you have to develop your own model. Perhaps, as Professor Merton says, there's trade-offs involved. There's trade-offs, for example, in the way, at least the evidence suggests, that, most land in rural Africa, and that this may be true, relevant here in this case also, is not held by individuals as private property. It's held by kinship groups or lineages or descent groups. And that's a very powerful thing. Your ancestors are buried under the land. The land is a patrimony of your ancestors. The lineage is a continuation of the ancestors. So all sorts of things come into play there, which don't come into play in thinking about land or property rights in land in Chicago, for example. But that's very important for the people, And the way I would think about that is our job as economists is to explain the trade-offs and to help people understand the trade-offs and to come up with ideas for, okay, you really value this. Is there a way of organizing production? Is there a way of organizing agriculture that treats seriously these values? And maybe there is an answer to that. Maybe you have cooperatives, for example, where people can work together. I would guess in African society, again, I don't know about Timor, but in African society, there's much more focus on the community. And, the famous expression is in Soto, in southern Africa would be Ubuntu, like I am because we are. There's a different notion of personhood, very different from the kind of individualistic society that I grew up Okay, but that notion of the community and the importance of the community is manifested in economic institutions, in property rights, and so I don't know how much we want to get into all of this cross-cultural way of thinking, but I think there are trade-offs. I think the evidence suggests there's trade-offs, for example, about the efficiency of agriculture, the productivity of agriculture in Africa. But I always think that that has a lot to do with a kind of failure of imagination of, okay, people have these values, there are these institutions. Let's do something differently. How do we do something differently? How do we organize something, in our cultural context where we can maybe help solve some of these problems of some of these trade-offs, help resolve some of these trade-offs. And I think, this is the way I think about the discussion earlier about, how do we achieve these goals for humanity? How do we improve people's welfare? How do we solve these problems of child labor? And I'm not an activist. I'm an academic scribbler, as John Maynard Keynes put it, So, but anyway, let me shut up. But that would be my response.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time, so I would like to use the privilege of moderator by asking the last question. If two of you were asked by our great leaders, Prime Minister and President, to advise to transform the economy of Timor-Leste, so each of you give one advice. So what are you going to advise? For the advice for transforming the economy of Timor-Leste, which I believe have the characteristic similar to the developing economies, small state developing economies. So what message that you want to leave for them? Maybe start with Professor Merton.
Oh, well, that's a great question. I alluded to it before. I think it's very important to have coordination. When you're doing something at the level of the country, you cannot look at them as silos. So you look at one thing, education. It's very important. We all agree with that. I don't think anybody... But you have to look at that in the context of everything else. I'll just give you one quick example. My understanding, and it may be wrong, but it makes a point. My understanding is that at least here, that the highly educated people that live here, the ones that are, actually have a very high unemployment rate, like 20%. I don't know that, but they'll make the point even if it's not accurate. And why might that be? And then what do they do about it? They've got this good education. They're very smart. What do? They go somewhere else. They're not going to stay unemployed if they're educated. So what have you done? By educating them that way, something's wrong. You put a lot of resources into good people who can use them, and they leave. So what I say is when you're doing things in big, that's what development I think of as being, you really have to have a coordination of sequencing. Not that I don't believe in education, but you need to get the education right to match what you have so that when they come out, they can do something here, not go off somewhere where they can do something, you see? And so coordination is really important, and timing. Everybody has a really good thing that they want to see done immediately, but that doesn't add up. And so that would be my one thing, is think as a system and then set the sequencing to optimize and use the best science and use the most efficient, economically designed institutions to do it.
Thank you. Establish a system where we have the coordination, education, and sequencing of priorities. Thank you so much for the advice. Professor Robinson.
I think I'm going to say the same thing in a completely different way, actually, which is, I don't think it's about, I don't know, my view of the world is that there's an enormous amount of heterogeneity in different societies. There's different opportunities. People have different talents and capacities. There are different histories and different cultures. So what's going to work in South Korea is not going to be the same thing as Mauritius or Botswana or whatever it is. But like what I see, which is common about success stories, is not a specific economic policy or even a specific institution. It's a sort of obsession with achievement, if you like. And let me give you an example since I mentioned South Korea. So last summer, I was interviewing a gentleman who worked in the Ministry of Trade, International Trade in Korea in the 1970s. And his job every morning was to come to work and call up every single one of the 26 customs houses in Korea and ask them, how much did you export yesterday? Now, no economist would think it was slightly interesting how much you exported yesterday. But this was a kind of heuristic for keeping everybody focused on this one thing, which was exporting, which is driving forward the Korean economy. So I asked the gentleman, he said, by noon I had to get a list of, on President Park's desk of how much did every customs export yesterday. And I said, well, what happened if it was a good customs day? He said, we had a song, we'd go out for lunch, we drink wine, it was, okay. What happens if it was a bad export day? President Park would call me up, and I had to go, and I had to call the CEO of Hyundai and the CEO of Samsung and get them to explain, why didn't you export anything yesterday? So, crazy, but it was a way of just focusing energy, attention on achieving this thing. And the genius of that was, if you're going to export stuff, lots of other things have to happen. Lots of other things have to come into place. The companies have to make things happen. Samsung and Hyundai had to make things happen to produce stuff that people wanted to buy. And it was, we would say there were lots of linkages or there were lots of spillovers. So it was a very clever, I have no idea why President Park decided to do it like that. But I see this laser-sharp focus on getting things done and moving things ahead in a way that you can measure also. That's very important.
Thank you. Focus on getting things done and how to measure it. And you come with a very good, very strong statement of obsession with achievements. I think that's a very good advice. So with that, join me to give a round of applause to our great panelists. We have come to the end of our session. So I think the session highlights very important thing on science creates possibilities, finance provides mechanisms for turning possibilities into investment. Institutions determine whether those possibilities ultimately translate into broad and sustainable prosperity. So with that, let me leave two messages from our session. The first message is economic transformation is ultimately the transformation of capabilities of people, institutions, firms, and financial systems. The second message, because this is a live stream, so I like to encourage young people, even our great leaders, all leaders, like our Prime Minister and President, they are still spending their time to listen, to participate in these sort of sessions, innovation, science, technology. So we, as the young people, we should invest our time to learn more from the global thinkers. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor, and also sincere thanks to Professor Robert Merton and Professor James Robinson for sharing their insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, this brings our morning program to a close. We'll now break for lunch. The Science and Technology Expo remains open throughout the day, and we encourage you to take the opportunity to visit the exhibitions. We are also serving our international guests coffee. Please try some Timorese coffee at the Coffee Garden. For those of our panelists scheduled to return to their hotel before the afternoon program, please report to the logistic desk. Our main conference program will resume here at 2:30, and we'll remind you 15 minutes before our commencement of the new panel discussion. The next panel discussion is on feeding and sustaining the planet. Please ensure that you are back in the hall and seated a few minutes before the session begins. Thank you and enjoy your lunch. For our VVIPs and also international guests, lunch is still the same as our coffee break. For all the participants, please enjoy your lunch. It's served at the corridor just next to the entrance door. Bom apetite, ita soro fal malu tu kuro balung, ami sei fo hanoi ita vot sira, minuto sanu resin lima antes ita continua a sessão turma.
Thank you so much. Now we are going to the venue where we host the lunch, and we will have an informal statement. The Prime Minister and President is there. They may have follow-up questions. You guys are doing this. I'm extremely happy. Honestly, I think the problem with students
Kita foi acompanha a sessão da rua da Dersanto e a melodia, né? Ya, depois já lançou continua a carreira, né? E a break of nenhum. Ya, ho não né? O gente colheu com a progresso ba iha nação desenvolvido siram, ya. Na mesma coisa tema com a semera ciência para desenvolvimento. Ciência Inovação no Desenvolvimento. E o desenvolvimento bela acontece e a nação será bem que se dá o desenvolver o dia. A ideia principal é que a nação mais desenvolvido bela halo progresso se investe em ciência, inovação, infraestrutura, no usa recursos na de maneira sustentável. E o ponto importante sira maka hanesa ohen orador se até katak educação. E a educação mak base importante para progresso. O enhira povo lido jovens sira hatan educação dia sira bela desenvolve conhecimento, habilidade, no criatividade a resolver problema e reilaram. E o ponto sira maka ciência no tecnologia. Nós vamos precisar investir em pesquisa científica na tecnologia. Tecnologia bela ajuda em agricultura, saúde, educação, transportação, no serviço público. E tu falar em inovação, lá precisa, inovação precisa sempre de tecnologia complicado. Bela mas saiu se ideia simples ne resolve problema local. Exemplo, usa tecnologia digital para facilitar acesso a informação ao mercado para a agricultura sira. E a infraestrutura macanesa em estrada, eletricidade, BMOs, internet, escola no hospital dia sira importante teves. Infraestrutura ajuda a atividade da economia, não facilita o acesso a serviço básico. Ya, hosi danema que bela acontece desenvolvimento vai economia. Nação se precisa criar oportunidade de serviço, no apoio empreendedor, no negócio que vai gerar oportunidade de serviço. Será bela aumenta o rendimento, no contribui para a economia nação. Ya, o recurso natural no sustentável vai nação menos desenvolvido da barak e recurso natural barak. Mais bem. Recursos sira ne tem que usar a responsabilidade atau la estraga ambiente no atau benefício mos para geração futuro. Pressão entre o governo, universidades, setor privado, comunidade, no parceiro internacional. E a cooperação pelo reconhecimento, tecnologia, no investimento. Yeah. Ita usa pesquisa na inovação atau dia produção agricultura. Agricultor sira bala produz liutang etang rendimento dia kliu. na nação bela menos dependência ba produto importado. Conhecimento científico pode resolver o problema, não há de amores emanhã. Problema será não busca solução baseada em evidência, resultados de pesquisa, bela transforma essa tecnologia política no serviço nebe for benefício para a comunidade. Ia parte seu maka hanesan ia Timor ia ministério lubukida hanesan ia agricultura. Ia parte agricultura bela zona agricultor sira aumenta produção, liusi pesquisa nebe maka itahalo. Ya pesquisa bahaya saurinio que bela ajuda prevene no trata mora sira. Ya ciência com o ambiente bela ajuda protege a floresta, tasse no biodiversidade. Tecnologia digital bela ajuda a educação no serviço público. Pesquisa com a energia renovável bela ajuda busca fonte de energia nebe sustentável. E a parte seluk itu bela dia kata onde a ciência né bela serve para o desenvolvimento. Primeiro uma classe de educação. Ciência ajuda a forma o conhecimento na capacidade. A tu pensa, o crítico não resolve o problema. Segundo uma classe de inovação. Resultados de ciência bela transforma essa ideia. Produto que serviço for uma bela ajuda à sociedade. Terceiro, maca, se tomar a decisão. O governo bela usa dados na evidência científica a torná-la política pública nebe apropriado. Ponto tuir fala mesmo que se desenvolvimento sustentável. Ciência bela ajuda a usar recurso natural, o cuidado, o de garante que geração agora, no futuro, bela retam benefício. Para Timor-Leste, ciência bela sai instrumento importante a resolver desafios sira e país de união. E a mensagem principal é que ciência vai serviço de desenvolvimento união, mas que a ciência tem que ir a ligação com a necessidade real do povo união. O objetivo é que a ciência aumenta o conhecimento. Mas usa conhecimento a resolver o problema. Cria oportunidade, a economia, não aumenta a qualidade de vida do povo. E a refila vai a ciência na transformação econômica. Ciência na transformação econômica, ou ciência, tecnologia, na inovação, bela muda, na a economia nação ida. O de criar oportunidade de serviço aumenta a produtividade, não melhora mores povo. Sai de uma transformação econômica é um processo e da economia nação muda a atividade, a produtividade que a atividade, a produtividade no valor aslitan. Exemplo se a agricultura lá os de fa café, a matéria-prima. Mas usa tecnologia até processo café. Halo embalagem não faz nesse produto final. Nem beleza valor no rendimento asli tang. Essa ciência ajuda a economia. Nesse itu orang acompanhadão você orador será a apresentação. E a ciência ajuda a economia maka esse ponto primeiro maka aumenta a produtividade. pesquisa ciência na tecnologia pela ajuda agricultor, pesquisador no empresa atau produz liutang, o tempo no recurso nebe menos. Ponto tuir falame que cria produto no serviço phone. Ciência bela ideia phone nebe transforma sai produto que serviço. Exemplo maka aplicação digital, sistema de pagamento eletrônico, tecnologia agricultura no energia renovável. E ponto se ele fala maka cria oportunidade de serviço. Para o setor phone se desenvolve, precisa de habilidade phone. Nebele cria emprego para jovens sira. E a ponto e costume que aumenta a competitividade. Tecnologia no inovação pela ajuda a empresa local sira produz produto com qualidade dia. No bel compete e mercado local no internacional. Baia Timor-Leste ciência bela ajuda transforma a economia econômica e a área sira hanesan agricultura, café, pesca, turismo, energia no economia digital. Ho situação irane tamba fokaleu ba hareleu kuliah maskona ba e universidade foi ensaio sira nemaka papel jovem será importante para a transformação econômica. Também será bela sai pesquisador, engenheiro, programador, empreendedor, no inovador. Se jovem será reta educação no treinamento dia, será bela criar solução fom para problema e a Timor-Leste.
Ouvintes rádio na televisão Timor-Leste, foi da acompanha Liba a discussão no diálogo painel russi orador internacional Sira com a ciência, desenvolvimento no transformação econômica. E a cidadania o vice-primeiro-ministro, ministro do Assunto Social, Mariano Assanami Sabino.
Obrigado pelo tempo, excelência. Hauneng estamos ministro com o assunto social e tabotmos haré com o setor agricultura, saúde e educação. Ele usa semeira de RASIC, sai da maquita cara público, ele usa juventude lori ciência para desenvolvimento e samite dane.
Primeiro, dehamba inanama sira, ba jovem sira, ba estudante, ba intelectual hutu, docente sira hutu, kata ka ita la iha hili, ita la os hakara ko la koi, mas ve digitalização, tecnologia, ne anesan ita ne obrigação, ita tem a parte dune e a mundo global ita ne hoi da ne dune. Também maka ita precisa modernizar, ita ne setor oin pusi e-health va ver liu a saúde nian, digitalização vai saúde nian e mos laos de digitalização, mas vemos quando va oin maka a sistema curativo sira nebema que usa a tecnologia para eficiente liuba e a controlo eficiente liuba e a operação e a curativo sira selo. Não nemos a agricultura ita precisa transforma ita halona esforço o que dan tinam barak liuba ita e processo intensificação extensificação e a extensificação ita apoio tratores e tratores e a intensificação introduz inovação lubuquida e depois a diversificação aí ita contribui mas bem se dá o máximo se dá o que na fatem moderno ita cara jovem se envolve o smart agriculture o transforma nebe agricultura moderno nebe mas lá usa uma força baraclio mas bem produção sai lá usa uma força baraclio esforço baraclio lá usa uma manual por exemplo e a parte pescas quando cairican ema começa né equipamento nebe que bele deteta ikan nebe ikan saída makenva e depois vai ir a roubar né bele cair direita e a most smart agriculture nebe ita utiliza ona e a desenvolvimento rural ita halona e fatin a lima ne ni dança né nebe maka lauda dau liu a horticultura mas nesse dá o custo máximo e também maka o Hanoi sirane itabel hare kata transforma a economia nenia fundamento ba Timor-Leste ne ita tene kata kita ne setor produktivo ne ia tolu ne beka tu sai base ba ita ne economia ida maka petroleum ho gas minerai ho mineiros ida seluk maka agricultura pescas pecuária floresta e ida seluk maka turismo ne hoto precisa facilidade liu tecnologia para atubele moderniza e atubele faan itene produtos irane liu anesan area turismo para area turismo religioso turismo turismo ba ecologis ba tasi nebe makafura forro nebe que capaz histórico turismo histórico sirane hoto ne ita precisa promove ho itania artista sira ho itania cantador sira ho itania arte oi nebe makbele promove lihusi Facebook lihusi TikTok lihusi be digitalização oi nebe que embel conhece idane e bel faan lihusi dalan ba então ita tem que ia licença ba ia itane rai rasi kansa Facebook o hanesan TikTok ne tem que ia naran hene para itane emasira nebe que faan idane musbel hetan osan husian ba kata marketing ne ita usando ho tecnologia agricultura pronto ita tene katak sei difícil mas por exemplo agora smart agriculture balu nebe kalone ita lihusi telemóvel ita bel controla o insama carrega o insama kapara o insama ka tu taumatan por exemplo aqui a fahi ia fatin dal rumah mai dadid make alarm para saida resto ne ita controla o sidiu la os batama hotu balaran nebe ko da it fale mora so yo em balaran nebe ia evento idane ita convida experto oi mai hene e inclui prêmio Nobel Nobel Lawrence sirane atu mai hene para tu fahe experiência hoitani intelectual sira hoitani jovem sira expert sira itanian e ita hen kata comunicação ne la os para date a submit ne mai bele ia continua relação para a comunicação tamanema que a nível ensino superior itamos Hanoi kata exige para a universidade sira ia aula digital nebe maka vai hira bele ia kuliah tamu nebe maka docente senior sira nebe expert ia economia ia agricultura ia digital ia AI bele hanurin husiliur mai vai hira quando ita aula digital nebe que dia para ita aluno sira la bele ia kotu liu ia ciência ia inovação funsira então ita karaka objetivo ida mak ita karak ia na fatine conexão comunicação baidane moderniza itane ensino superior ou musa educação para ita também estandarização ASEANian ne critério ida por exemplo ita precisa uma PhD nebe maka doutoramento nebe maka tem que ir e a universidade Lubukida esforço baidane e governo se for apoio baidane mas o governo rasikmus inicia tem que hari PhD da nebe maka universidade oi bela escola neba ita bela kuliah neba e ita governo bel facilita também standardização ita mus reforça a politécnica ita tem politécnica pecuária e ona betano ita precisa politécnica pescas la cleurtan operacionaliza ona a politécnica ba turismo nian e lauten ita mus transforma ona instituto café ne ba los café det faculdade selu que alarne ita se hasai para bai fale integra an ba fale UNTL en bani ita específico vai dane ita mus agora dau apoio e facilita UCT Universidade Católica para IHNBA e MBBS faculdade MBBS indiana nenba mas bita cara futuro misturamos e tenia faculdade medicina e UCT buat sirne hotu e UCT e ona aula digitalização nebe maka emabel hanorin husiliur idane importante para ita moderniza e setor educação mas vemos ita hasa level para ita bel hal competição no dar família e ASEAN e mos ita hanesan presidente oin nia discurso ita ona kata liu si CPLP liu si G7+ liu si ita parte husi a Organização Comércio Mundial ne hotu ne competição então ita tem hasa ita ne uma cerne qualidade também ne competição para tosuren ba Mas veio a parte selo que estamos a desafio bom, a segurança alimentar, soberania alimentar, e tem problema estante nebe que malnutrição crônica nebe que e tá lá tem número ne lolos e tá se busca método nebe que dia para atu justifica número ne, mas agora o que tá simo o número da liuba ia 47%, agora sa tumba ia 45%, mas bem lá to kata kita te ida ne ia duni ita tem hatun makas tambah estante nga o malnutrição crônica ne lá os de raspada ho crekas, mas bem nem problema maka problema bot maka formação cognitiva. Quando o kakutak ne file ne ladum completo, se for efeito makas ba itane nação ne futuro tamba futuro nação ne ita investe itane wansira futuro nação ne ita investe a jovem sira se ita investe maka lá máximo mos ita lá halo futuro ne máximo é futuro. Então ita precisa hareda né. Então desenvolvimento capital social né importante teve o ministério sira né bem relevante né tem que concentra para ita ba hasur ita né desafio bot nação né desafio bot mak ida maka kiak número kiak né bem que bot número estantin né bem que bot malnutrição né bem ho insegurança alimentar né bem que bot e mos tunliu ita se dá o que cria campo de trabalho de dia vai ter jovens sira nebe makas. Então vai hira ita foca ba concentração ida ne maka desenvolvimento ne halai ba atu hatun ida ne hatun kia hatun insegurança alimentar ba halai ba soberania alimentar hatun ba be estante ne be que asne ho laos de ton ho manual ita tem que digital ho estante mus ho digital ita bel deteta INB los dunica lá ema ba haludete entrevista manual ema balo hanoin kata katu apoi ema belden hahan la ia au ne uang krekas au ne uang lahan mai be ita la deteta lolos ia problema causa ne be maka número bot ne ita la deteta lolos. Então
pois não silêncio ne rasik hanoin hare liumos ba setor agricultura então em silêncio explica kata Timor Leste horas nedang ita adopta na smart agricultor. Hauning oposição Timor Leste yang oras nedang hane somos membro de ASEAN ita sedang adopta máximo tecnologia mas be compara com nação terceira agora será desenvolve na agrotecnologia o insa produção Timor Leste nem rasa que tu bele compete mercado ASEAN e daí dificulta kala silêncio
tecnologia ou digital foi ikusikus ne maksa makas ne kala mas tecnologia ita introdução na cleo só que participação jovem se dá o máximo ita ia be ita ia rai ne be que potente mas ita se dá o máximo mas be ita tem halo desenvolvimento na fatin liu ba be importante be sabe ba agricultura ita introduz a quedan liu ba ne ansan oinaudian ia extensificação haluan liutan area kuda ita apoio tratores corren tractores e ne parte ida para ita tem menos zona tenaga manual força manual hanesan usa carau sirane ne ida ia parte intensificação ita introduz na mos anesan SRI ou tecnologia selo nebe que introduz tecnologia ia area ida ne pronto ida neita halona mas se dá o máximo ne kata ita smart agriculture ne foi maka ia smart agriculture ne foi maka ia parte baludet la os botida sin modelo de se nessa piloto tama nela os bot agora dau kita fase dan nebe kita tu moderniza ne maka kita hakasan para atu lao ne e tama ne maka continua reabilitação no mos ia reforça ba infraestrutura nessa irrigação se ita na faten apoio mas vemos ia ter no estudo para atual barragem importante teve vai tanerai ne desde ao ser ministro da agricultura ao sempre dehan kata ne importante mas be atual lá é momento no baden também estrada prioridade eletricidade prioridade nesse dá tama prioridade mas agora ne tem que tama prioridade também ita tem que se ita é barragem ba aihoris ba ema nebe que falta be precisa be nebe que tem que saudável também estantimos ne problema ida maka problema be nebe que la saudável e também nema kita investe ba be agora é fatin lubukida e inclui a baucau e a lauten e a manufai e a dilimos ita concentra ela ida areda ne liu ba bemos mas be barragem é importante mos ia evaporação nebe mak lao ia barragem sira nebe kita hari maka ita mos bele laos totalmente mas be ita bel zerona mudança climática né udan nebe kita rai heleten bele tum filafali e beleona evaporação nebe ke lao ne diaklio duke be hutu batasi ni evaporação mínimo teber então ita simulos de mak mudança climática global né nebe ia buat barak nebe mak ita lao neba ia area agricultura no pescas né importante liu pesca tasinian ita agora traz a ela economia azul mas be tem que explora e proteja e promove vai ia tasi nebe que ita bele usa máximo não temos agricultura ita lao hela o ikan oi nebe maka liu ikan tilapati magor lao makas mas be processamento o insa maka bele fornece ba merenda escolar bele fornece ba inanisin rua sira nebe maka kita precisa ter sirahan ikan ho quota ida neta se dá tau ba consideração ba dene então ita precisa detalhe ituan konaba saída na makita intervenção ba itane povo ba itane uansira para ita bele investe ba futuro então tecnologia sira ne ita bele usa mai be nela halakon ciência ba e liu maka o insa maka ita halu itane uansira matene tene uansira matene que tem que na fatin ho base kakutak ne na fatin principal buat sira ne hutu ne instrumento para ita usa aban bairua até robot sira se truca e tem serviço e a área burocracia e a área oi mas nemos mais se kakuta também educação ne curriculum ne tem que na fatin reforça forma kakuta ne beke matenek e também hoi de ne deit maka ita ne maka sabe também ita ne desenvolvimento ne ita dehan kata ema maksai centro ba desenvolvimento e desenvolvimento tem que ba ema e mak ricusoin importante vai tenerai ita tem que halo programa sira ne bek halai bahan sane
Sua Excelência, questão de tempo, e que o vice-primeiro-ministro em Esperança Summit ida né?
Esperança bot makida né, mas que estudante intelectual, docente barak lamai ia CCD para participar, mas be hau fair katak sira ya uma sira ya faten bede liu husi digitalização liu husi Facebook embel haren ba embel participa saída mak importante é mas sira intelectual do bukida expert do bukida ne be kita maine rai hela sira ne adressa sira ne be número telefone e tá na faten halo comunicação contato sira ne be que participa ne delegação husi universidade o ne sira tem que conexão ne mak importante também conexão mak loke dalam vai ter conhecimento e ter debate e ter discussão e ter fahe experiência ida com a experiência rasi nação ida com o processo ida ne beke diferente também mak kita precisa fahe ita los única tak ita ne avançado e a infraestrutura e a economia ita ladun laolais tu ita ne mehi mas be e a processo o desenvolvimento capital social, desenvolvimento humano, ita dignifica ema, respeito ema, liberdade, até for livre para mídia, né? Ita a escalação nebe Ásia, mus ASEAN. Ita mus tem orgulho hoje né? Nema mus ita ne progresso ida, nebe kita fahe hoje maselo. Sira fahe tecnologia, sira fahe economia o insama klalais, mas ita mus ya experiência selo quando va luta na rukida, ita ha reconciliação, ita construi paz, construir Estado, construir nação e agora dá o processo para continuar a construir caráter, né? Partida ne vemos ita faheba emaselo. Então, orgulho ba ita, eroi sira e uan sira, estudante sira, docente sira, hoha kraikan no dar ministro coordenador ao russo para ita aprende. Estuda, seriedade ita hotunia, kuda ba ita ne uan sira, ba jovem sira, tambah nação seiha sirne lima. Saída makita halo agora, makita seiku abang bairua. Saída la kuda di dia agora, ita mu saída kuda seiku, saída ku aifuan beke furak e futuro. Ita hanoi Timor Leste ida próspero diak ba oin ita teng harean dene. Ita mus tem que zere di dia kita ne democracia. Para democracia ita ne multipartidária, multiorganização, multi-arte marciais oin ne sai valor ne bek unifica ita ne força e tem identidade lá os para tu fazer ita. É importante ter ba líder sira, ba jovem sira, ba imi hutot. Jovem imi a jornada rasik, hamri que mina in leten, pode ter nação baú.
Obrigado para excelência no tempo. Aunque lipan sabe no excelência o ciclo baita, maka ku ita kuda kedas agora o resultado ku é futuro, mai. Nebe jovem sira na fatin kari kita bot ita hari kata primeiro-ministro, presidente da república na fatin mantém e a cimeira da neho depois intervenção direta bai haitania be cientista sira musakar opinião, mas que sira idade musakar pronto na fatin acompanha cimeira neto hoto. Antang na fatin RTTL se transmite direta a cimeira da neto remator sira loraik no abang. Aunque convida na fatin jovem sira povo Timor-Leste larantomak na bela consegue mais participar né bela RTTL se transmite direto baita bot sira fusi lorong ohing no abang e agora dadam ita se pausa Diana. Sim. Depois ita se continua ba agenda tuir mai.